Hello, I'm Paul Watts, head of the Asia Pacific desk here at RSM UK. Welcome to the latest in our UK to Global Services videos, giving UK middle market business insight into international expansion and business growth. Today, we're talking about Asia Pacific, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jason Yao, who is the Asia Pacific Regional Leader for RSM International. Jason, hi. The Asia Pacific region, as we know, covers a vast area and a multitude of individual economies, each at different stages of development and varying levels of growth. Investing and doing business in the region requires knowledge of a number of facets that affect each country. RSM's obviously had a long-standing presence in Asia Pacific and provides clients with lots of knowledge to unlock the market potential and helps them navigate diverse labour laws, compliance legislation and cross-border challenges. We've got a lot of expertise in investment strategies, corporate setups, market intelligence, and transfer pricing, which is essential for businesses entering the region. And it's a big region. RSM, in RSM terms, it's 21 countries, and we obviously can't cover it all today. And there will be some future videos on individual countries such as India, China, and Australia. But perhaps today we could focus on, at high level, on some key issues and some trends that you're seeing into 2022. Firstly, COVID's obviously had a big impact on the world, and on the region for the last couple of years. How's that going? How's that impacting your key markets currently?
Hey, thank you, Paul, and thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to just share some perspective with you and also the RSM audiences with regards to the state of the Asia Pacific region. As you mentioned earlier, our region is a geographically vast region that goes north all the way to Mongolia and south all the way to Australia. So when we look at Asia Pacific, we actually divide up to 4 or 5 sub-regions to make it a little easier. And so in terms of my sharing, I will also jump back and forth a little bit from the sub-regional perspective to make things a little easier for the audiences to understand. To address your first question in terms of the latest situation with COVID, I think we as a region was doing relatively well in the beginning of COVID. But the latest situation in the last 3 to 4 weeks is the entire region, except for maybe a few countries, are going through a very rough patch. So, given a couple of locations, for example, where I'm, personally located at the moment in Hong Kong, we go from about maybe 100 cases at the end of last year in 2021 to about 50,000 cases,
Wow.
as of last week on a daily basis. Some of the other numbers within the region, like if you go north to South Korea, at the end of last year was about 2,000 cases, and now is about 300,000 cases per day.
Mm-hmm.
Then you move south to ASEAN, then maybe looking at both Singapore and Vietnam, right? Singapore has adopted the coexist with COVID policy since Q3 of last year. So they're relatively ready for this wave, but still they're dealing with about 20 to 25,000 cases per day. But when you go to Vietnam, which is one of the very strong emerging economies in the last couple of years, they were doing really, really well in the beginning of COVID. Everything was under control, a very strict border control as well. But now they're dealing with about 150,000 cases per day as of last week. So from the regional perspective, I think except for Australia, New Zealand, and China to a certain extent are still relatively under control during this latest Omicron wave. All the other countries are now in the midst of this wave. But, we're holding our heads up and looking things at in a very positive way. We hope that we'll be out from this wave in a month or two's time. And most of the businesses right now are actually looking past, the wave, even though we're in the middle of it, and thinking about what type of investments that they will be looking at, and what type of upgrades or internal initiatives that they should be embarking upon after this latest wave.
No, that's good to hear. Yeah, no, difficult times, but hopefully, there are the people thinking ahead and planning ahead. I mean, I did see something, despite these sort of headwinds from the pandemic, that Asia Pacific region is still to be expected to be one of the fastest growing regions of the world, 6.5% growth in 2021, led by China and India. And from a UK point of view, I mean, China was the UK's third largest trading partner, up to the 4 quarters ending Q3 2021, accounting for 7.5% of total UK trade. So very important, and you see that growth despite the challenges continuing, hopefully.
Yeah, well, of course, the recent Russia-Ukraine tension have added another layer or
Absolutely.
layer to the situation with regards to the trade between UK/Europe and China being a very big economy. Yes, so China is predicted to have around 6 to 8% real GDP growth in 2022. Um, China is still one of the largest, trading partner with UK and US. And if you go back 2 years ago when COVID first started into early 2020, Premier Xi Jinping actually come up with the direction of the Chinese economy going forward in the next decade. And they call it the two cycle. One is the international cycle and one is the domestic cycle. And China, what we have seen in terms of the implementation of that policy in the last 12 months was really happening where China are looking more inward in supporting their GDP growth number as opposed to relying on international trades. And especially, if you talk about 2 decades ago being the manufacturing, hub of the entire world. Um, and I think looking at China right now, because of the very strict border control that they implemented, there were a lot of impact because whether is inter-region or intra-region historically have a lot of traffic into and out of China. But to give it a perspective, as a region in 2021, the international passenger demand within our APAC region was only 7% of the 2019 pre-COVID level.
Wow.
And and a lot of the uh, passenger travels are now only limited to domestic travels. But as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of countries, even though we're in the middle of this wave, are looking past and looking forward into 3 to 6 months' time. So countries like Thailand and even Indonesia, where are heavily relying upon their tourism as well as kind of international trading are already planning to open up to the rest of the world. Now back to China, I do believe that China will continue sticking with that domestic consumption policy in the near future, especially in 2022. I don't see that China will open up the border 100% this year at all. Part of the reason, as we lately follow the news in China in terms of the vaccination situation, is that China is actually developing its own version of the mRNA vaccines. And the vaccine that has been, distributed or, being currently used by the Chinese population is called the inactivated vaccine, similar to, the flu vaccines that we have taken, year over year. The coverage or the protection rates, of course, is a little lower, just like, after we taken flu, we start well, the flu vaccines, we still get flu sometimes, right? So until I think China, especially they're looking at what's happening in Hong Kong, where our vaccination rate is about 70%. But when you look at 70 and above at that age group, it's only around 20%. So China is really going to wait until the mRNA version of their vaccines is available to the domestic consumption. They were making sure the vaccination rates for 70 and above is going to achieve 80 to 90% and do not take any risk of a huge fatality rates after they open up the border. So that is going to certainly, I think, have an impact on the inter-region trading patterns, as well as the intra-region. But if we move outside of China and we look
I
at,
was going to ask. Yeah, I was going to ask you about any other sort of standout countries or anything that's affecting the other parts of the region.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So Paul, I was thinking that if we're looking outside of China, we still have different pockets of the sub-region, as I mentioned earlier. One pocket will be the ASEAN, which includes Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, those emerging economies. And then you have the South Asia, which is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and then you have ANZ, right, Australia and New Zealand. I do see ASEAN is going to take a very, very important role for the recovery of APAC in the next 2 years. Reason
Mm.
being is majority of the countries are ready to open up for the rest of the world to, go into APAC and do trading. And I've already seen a lot of the global, conglomerates where they usually have their headquarters based in either Hong Kong or Singapore, depending on whether they are looking at the consumption market in China or they're looking at APAC as a region, are really moving a lot of their resources and their leadership team out from Hong Kong to Singapore, and to a certain extent, some companies are also moving all the way down south to Australia. So naturally, I would see ASEAN and Australia will have a very, very closely connected relationship in the next 2-3 years. If you look at South Asia, naturally they work with everybody, right? In India, they're very big in outsourcing,
Yeah.
services. They work with China, they work with ASEAN, and if you look at the latest data, in 2021, they actually have about an 8% real GDP growth in India in 2021, and 2022 is going to be close to 10%. So India, I do think that is going to take a extremely, extremely important role in terms of technological and digital transformation for the region because of resources that they have, the talents and expertise that they have, and some of the digital conglomerates are actually Indian-based company. So as opposed to looking at ASEAN, where you have all type of industry and all type of trading, behaviors happening intra-region, I think India is going to place much heavier emphasis
Mm.
on technology, IT, digital, etc. So yeah, so back to your original question, I think outside of China, which is the biggest economy in APAC, I do think the importance of other emerging economies will take a much bigger role, going forward.
Excellent. No, thank you, Jason. I think that's a very important message from a UK point of view as well. Just there are opportunities throughout the region, and the tech point is particularly well observed, I think. So, yeah, no, thank you very much for your insights today, and thank you all for joining and watching. Please do contact RSM UK for any further information to be connected to the right people in our Asia Pacific region, and look out for other videos in this global series. So, thank you very much, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.